Good day. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show. Well, we're into June. I'm looking forward to it. Beautiful day out here in Calgary. I think it is in most areas. I always start with the weather. Unless you guys get logged on and talking, but it's a nice benign area to start before I rant and rave and get on to all the other things going on out there. But, I'm not a winter person. I'm not. I despise winter. I despise the snow, the mud, the darkness, the rest. So I'm going to sit and enjoy it and keep pointing out how great it is when we're into summer and enjoying this weather right now. And I'll take it. I'll take every bit of it that I got. So I got a good show, as always, I like to think, going on today. A little later, I'm going to have guest Dave Bradley on. He was from one of the founders of Bitcoin Well. He's part of Bitcoin Brains. He's Bitcoin everything, this fella. And they've got a thing coming up called Bitcoin Rodeo. It's a big gathering in Calgary. So we're going to talk about of course, Bitcoin and the upcoming event. He's got JP Sears coming out to that. If you don't know who JP Sears is, check him out, actually. He's a fantastic comedian, very, very funny guy. And there'll be, other things going on at the Bitcoin gathering, but that'll certainly be one of the highlights there. All right, well, let's get on to what I'm going to start my ranting about. I might as well start something benign, non too controversial or anything like that. Let's talk about Pride Month. Yes, it's June, and it is Pride Month. Okay, it doesn't bother me. It really doesn't. I don't care. And that's the thing. So, it got me thinking on some things, though. And it's something that recently happened with me. I realized that Liberal Cabinet Minister Seamus O'Regan is gay. Oh, okay. I know it's not a profound revelation. It's been common knowledge for quite some time. And O'Regan hasn't made a secret of it. But despite myself being a rather avid political watcher, I actually didn't know O'Regan's sexual orientation. I doubtless must have run across references to it over the years, but it never really stuck in my memory because you know what? It doesn't matter. The only reason I suddenly noticed O'Regan's orientation was that he gave a rant in Parliament a few weeks ago about how people like him had rights suppressed in his lifetime. And I was wondering to myself, what the hell's this privileged white-bread man from Newfoundland going on about? There wasn't much Irish oppression. I had to think about it and look into it. And then I realized, oh, he's not straight. Okay. Well, I'm utterly indifferent to O'Regan's sexual orientation, just as I am with everybody else's. And it's a great development, though, because things haven't always been this way. If you might remember some of the older political watchers, former NDP MP Sven Robinson, he was the first openly gay member to serve in Parliament when he came out in 1988. Now, for most of his term, whenever Robinson was mentioned in a news or commentary, his status as a gay MP was almost always mentioned. Not necessarily in a derogatory way, but it was considered an oddity. His sexual orientation ended up defining who he was in the public eye for most of his time in office, whether he liked it or not. At least until he was convicted of stealing a ring and was thereafter remembered as a petty thief. Canada's evolved a lot in the last few decades, and mostly for the better. Most of us don't reference a gay MP or a same-sex marriage anymore. It's just an MP, and it's just marriage. It's not a gay couple, it's just a couple. This is where we need to be. This didn't happen overnight, though. It took decades of effort from activists within and outside the LGBTQ community. The Pride movement was an integral part of what fostered the changes in societal attitudes towards LGBTQ people. I was dragged down to a Pride parade by a girlfriend in the late 1990s. And the reason I was dragged wasn't quite because I was terrified of gay people, but I was still awkward and squeamish on the issue, as most of the people who grew up in the 1970s were. When I went to school, I would have been sent to detention for swearing in class, but wouldn't have gotten much more than a finger wagging if I'd have called a fellow student a fag. The word was in popular use back then, even on TV and in movies, believe it or not. Spending a day around people from the LGBTQ community was good for me and helped me grow out of my intolerance. The term pride is appropriate for the movement, too. LGBTQ, boy, those letters get to me, though. We're constantly told they should be ashamed of who they are and that they should keep their sexuality hidden and suppressed. I can understand why they want to celebrate who they are loudly and without shame at events. So yeah, pride's the right word. Pride parades and gatherings allowed for that. It's come up to now, though. Sexual orientation is protected by law. And LGBTQ people enjoy all the same rights as straight people do. More importantly, most people, anyways, have learned to set aside prejudices and accept people for who they are. Sure, there's still some acts of intolerance and some hateful people out there, but that's a dwindling subset of society. But this led to a different problem. This has left radical activists with a quandary. They've reached the goal line, but instead of being content and stopping, they're now continuing to push the line farther down the field. They're angry, they thrive on protest, and they're running out of things to protest for. That's why they're insisting on getting more militant at Pride events, and ironically exclusionary, as they're starting to pick and choose who's even allowed to attend them. People don't want to take their kids to a parade where a nude man is going to simulate sexual acts, as activists keep working to push the shock envelope. As the movement embraces more radical stances, they've begun eating their own. Edmonton canceled a pride parade a couple of years ago because Black Lives Matter activists got upset. And Philadelphia had their pride parade disrupted by the ridiculous Queers for Palestine movement. This week, Winnipeg's pride parade was reportedly temporarily blocked by Queers for Palestine activists. Queers for Palestine. Really, guys, really think a little harder. And this was apparently in the traditions, this is their words, of two-spirit, queer, and trans resistance. What the hell does that even mean? Are we really expected to embrace and respect groups this nutty? It isn't enough to be tolerant or accepting anymore. Activists now are demanding open displays of support for their cause. Businesses are shamed if they don't have enough rainbow flag stickers on display, and public figures are called out if they dare miss even one of the many, many pride events that happen in every city now. It really is reminiscent of the Seinfeld episode where Kramer wanted to take part in an AIDS march but didn't want to wear the ribbon. I don't know if you guys remember watching that. He was eventually chased by an angry mob for literally not wearing his allegiance to a cause on his jacket. The pride movement went from being a brave minority, and they were, to becoming accepted by the majority, to now starting to get dominated by a fringe minority. There's always room for a society to evolve further, and there's always going to be pockets of intolerance to battle. If the hill now, though, for pride activists to die on has become the perceived right for elementary school children to change their gender pronouns, I think we can safely conclude the pride movement has run its course. Maybe it's time to set that aside and move ahead. Well, that's where I'm sitting on those things as Pride Month comes along. Either way, I hope the events go well. And it's just, we got to distinguish between the activists and the people they purport to be speaking for, because the activists tend to ruin things for sane people quite often, especially when they don't find anything better to do. All right, let's do a news check-in with Dave and see what else is going on out there. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going great, Cory. It's got to be the nicest day of spring so far.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful out there. It was a great walk in here.
How are things out of the compound? How are the bees coming along? How's the great dog?
Oh, the bees are doing great. The dogs are jerks, and no, everything all is well. They bark their brains out back. The bears haven't been around. I really, though I'm going to complain about a much more things in the show, I've got nothing to complain about at home right now.
Yep. Oh, awesome. That's great. Great news. Do you have Oilers fever, Cory?
No, I couldn't care less about them.
Oh, man. Not even that woman flashing?
That was outstanding. I did see that coming along. Well, I guess if somebody's going to come along as a new celebrity out of Edmonton, she's earned her place.
Yeah, well, we've got our Jonathan Bradley on the scene in Edmonton, and before this week, he knew little to nothing about hockey, believe it or not, but he's learning fast. So he's got a Oilers notebook that'll be up there every day with 3 or 4 tidbits on the game and the atmosphere surrounding it. And that young woman who did lift her top has been offered $100,000 by a U.S. porn site to come and maybe audition for stuff down there. So yeah, there's money to be made in that, Cory.
Well, didn't something similar when it was during the Calgary Stampede, and there was that one young lady in an alley who got herself sort of pierced from a couple directions? She did some porn after that as well. I don't know if it was a good lifetime direction for her, but she profited from it.
Yeah, she became a stripper on the D circuit, I think.
Oh, wow.
Lots of good news happening today, Cory, other than the Oilers. WestJet has introduced a new ultra-low fare, which they say is, you can basically just book a seat at the last minute. You have no choice of to where you sit. You sit at the back of the plane, and you get to board last, and no hand luggage and all that sort of good stuff. Air Canada, on the other hand, countered today with an offer of free food and booze on all Canadian flights. So they obviously saw a marketing opportunity there, and I think quite brilliantly jumped on it. The big news story of the last couple of days, Cory, has been dominated by the spy scandal happening down in Ottawa, where it's been revealed some of our elected MPs are actually spies for foreign countries. So our Jen Gerson has got the latest on that. If you're planning a European holiday, Foreign Affairs has just increased the terrorism alert for Italy, of all places. and other places in Europe. So we've got that story up. Mike Thomas, our real estate expert, is taking a look at the Bank of Canada dropping their prime rate today by a quarter point, and he's got a story on what it will mean for your mortgage if you'd hold a variable rate. And the sort of the head scratcher of the day, Cory, is the head of the Canadian Medical Association says vaccine injured people don't exist. She says there's no such thing as a vaccine injury, which I find quite strange because the government's been paying out, lots of money for people who are vaccine injured. So for Canada's top doctor to say that it doesn't exist, doesn't happen, quite frankly, is astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand some of the debate on the degree of risk or the degree of injuries or anything, but to say they aren't outright happening whatsoever, well, then they should close that hole for all those payouts they've been doing.
Oh, exactly. It's a strange thing to say, for sure.
We'll be, I'm sure, talking about that whole pandemic and government response for many years to come yet. I don't know if
Sure you will.
Solution.
Probably also on the pipeline tonight, too.
More than likely. All right. Well, I'll let you get back to gathering all that good news stuff there for us, Dave, and I'll see you after the show.
Thanks, Cory.
All right. This is our news editor, Dave Naylor. And yes, as you see, lots of stories, busy as always, all sorts of things going on out there. This is where I like to remind everybody the reason Dave's out there, Jen, Jonathan Bradley, all those folks, is because you guys have been subscribing. We don't take government dollars, guys. We thrive on advertising and subscription. So if you haven't subscribed yet, get on there. westernstandard.news/subscription, $9.99 a month, $100 a year, just like a newspaper subscription. It's well worth it, and it keeps us rolling. And there's just lots and lots to cover. And we put more news stories out than pretty much any other publication. I know we put out more than any other in the West at this time with this full newsroom. So, I see a commenter, Cheryl Don, there saying, what happened to the pipeline? Couldn't find it on the Western Standard Rumble channel. I'm not sure. I don't go to the Rumble channel that much. I do know if you go to the YouTube channel and under our channel in live, you'll be able to find all the pipelines there, though. I imagine it should be on Rumble somewhere, but I'm not too sure, Cheryl, but hopefully you can find it because, that's the show that we'll be on later where we break down with a panel and discuss a few other things. It was interesting with WestJet, and they're talking about that, and, they've basically come to a point of absolute no frills. So, even if you want to carry on bag now, you'll have to pay a little extra for that. But, people get upset with airlines, and I can understand because I'm not a big fan of them. In my past incarnation, when I used to travel all through the States, I used to get some of those horrible flights with 10 connections, and it was just not an enjoyable experience. Bad customer service, a bad time in general. But at the same time, flying in a lot of ways, even though it might not feel like it to some people, is cheaper than it's ever been, guys. It's not like it was when I was a kid. When you're 30 years ago, flying was a luxury. It's something you rarely did. You didn't hear about people now who, I'm going to fly out to Toronto for a couple of days and come back after the weekend. You didn't do that unless you were getting way up in the ultra rich. But the reason is because airlines have been responding. That's why they've been getting rid of those frills all the way along. The old days too. You used to fly on Ward Air and get proper silverware and, of course, an endless drink service coming to your table. But it was extremely expensive relative to the incomes of that time. And now we've pushed it down to the point where everybody's enraged at the lack of service. But that's the only way you're going to get the cheap prices too. It's just difficult. I don't know. WestJet, it's too bad. They're not really the up-and-comer anymore they used to be. I mean, they're another big airline. That kind of happens with a successful company. You're not the little cottage place anymore. You've turned into who you were fighting to begin with. But the good sign to see is, of all places, Air Canada responding and competing, because that's the way to solve these issues. Competition, that's the way to do it. That's why Air Canada used to be so horrible 30 years ago. They didn't have competition. They were a government-run airline back then. And they're still sort of coming out of that attitude. To see the two of them kind of going at it and competing for the amount of service they can offer you for what prices, I think it is good for us actually in general, though flying these days, again, still is miserable. I like the idea of fewer people having carry-on luggage because that's one of the things I used to hate. You land on the tarmac, the guy in the seat next to you gets up and he's standing with his butt in your face and he's trying to get his giant bag that he stuffed into the overhead compartment out of there, and it's still 10 minutes before they're going to open the bloody door. If there's no bags at all, I'm happier with that. It makes the flight a little less miserable and unpleasant. All right, I'll be miserable and unpleasant on some more things in a little while, but it's time to get to our guest, and that's Dave Bradley. He was on a couple of years ago, I believe we've had him on before, and now I see he's listed as the strongest and best-looking Bitcoin entrepreneur in Canada, apparently, and I'm not sure who bestowed that title, but it's a modest one, without doubt. And but Dave Bradley is the authority on all things Bitcoin. There's no doubt about that. So welcome to the show, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
So I brought you on because you've got the upcoming, and it's not your first one, but this Bitcoin Rodeo is coming up in Calgary. You've got a huge list of speakers. This event's going to be going on for a while. It's I guess if people are interested in all things Bitcoin, that's going to be the place to go.
Yeah, so it's a conference that we're putting on July 2nd and 3rd. It's downtown Calgary at the Grand Theatre. It's a great venue that we've done some conferences in the past there as well. And we've got an amazing lineup headlined by JP Sears, who is like the most famous guy that nobody knows who he is, or nobody knows what his name is. He's that comedian with the long red hair who's always making fun of the government. Most people have probably seen him on TikTok and Instagram and whatnot. And we've got an amazing lineup, and we're aiming to really put on a conference that kind of answers the question of like, why Bitcoin? You know, it's easy to get lost in a technical topic like this, but we're making this a non-technical conference designed really for people that are kind of in the boat where you're at, Cory, where it's like, you know, you're a little bit aware of Bitcoin, but more importantly, you and probably a lot of your listeners, and this is something that I've experienced in sort of like the freedom community in Alberta, is that people have identified the problem that Bitcoin solves. And namely, that problem is the out of control printing and then spending of money by our federal government. And, you know, we're all sort of starting to feel that bite now. Like a couple of years ago, probably even last time I was on your show, if we would have talked to an average person about inflation, you know, people have heard of it. Maybe some people knew what it was, but it was kind of like this nebulous thing that the government reports on that like didn't really hurt most people. And nowadays it's like, you know, if you've been to the grocery store, you can feel it, right? Like a steak is triple what it was 5 years ago. And so now I think with the, you know, very overzealous and ridiculous response that the governments of the world had to COVID, there are a lot more people that are sort of starting to wake up to this idea that maybe we shouldn't listen to everything that they tell us. And Bitcoin, I think, is kind of the tip of the spear of the response to that. So if you don't trust Justin Trudeau, why would you use money that he can print for free?
Absolutely, and it's certainly growing these days. But I mean, one question I have then, Bitcoin's kind of it's the big one. It was the first one on the block, but there's a number of other currencies out there. Why is Bitcoin the one to gravitate to versus the other ones?
Yeah, so the other currencies, cryptocurrencies as they're called, are generally anywhere between a really bad idea and a scam. And a lot of them are fueled by a lot of techno babble, trying to dazzle people with technical terms that make them sound important and interesting. But really what it all comes down to is just a single thing that separates Bitcoin both from all of those other currencies as well as all of the fiat currencies of the world. And that's the fact that there's no one in charge. So there's no one who can be like, I'm going to change the supply of Bitcoin. Whereas with Ethereum, for example, the number 2, they have a literal conference call where they decide what the supply of the currency is. And so instead of central bankers, you have basement nerds deciding what the currency supply is. And that might be better, but it's still a problem, because if you give someone the power to print the money that you use, they will. They'll print the money and spend it every single time. And so Bitcoin is unique in that there is no one in charge. And part of the reason for that is because very early on, it was worth basically nothing. And so the founder a lot of people think he may have died, but the founder has disappeared and certainly abdicated control of the project. Whereas all the other ones have a founder who's there, they have a board of governance, they have a corporation behind them in most cases. And really they're just, in most cases, more like a Ponzi scheme than, an actual currency.
Yeah, so Bitcoin, I mean, I actually took part in a program we had here at the Western Standard where part of my salary would go towards come to me in Bitcoin, and the Standard was matching with it a few years ago. And I didn't really pay much attention to it. We just kind of let it build up and go. And we had a look, we started watching about 6 months ago. Whoa, I mean, that's a healthy little fund that built up off to the side there. Though, I mean, Bitcoin had its ups and downs and some volatility in the short term. The general trend has been up, but is that what somebody should look at Bitcoin for, as more of a longer term place to put money, or is there more practical short term use for it too?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the most effective way to use Bitcoin is a long-term savings tool because it is very volatile, and most things that we use are priced in dollars. So it's important to us that our spending power in dollars is pretty constant over time. So if you need to buy something major in a month, storing it in Bitcoin until then might not be the best idea because your purchasing power could go up drastically or down drastically in that month. Whereas, like you said, over a longer period of time, there's never been a time when you couldn't buy Bitcoin, wait 5 years, and be massively up in dollar terms. And part of that is, the price of Bitcoin is going up as more people are speculating. It's easier to buy. We have ETFs around the world, but really the big driver to that is not actually that Bitcoin's going up; it's that the dollar is going down. Right, our dollars are becoming more and more plentiful. The Canadian government has printed an absolutely unprecedented amount of money in the last 4 years. We've printed more than any other G7 nation, and we've really got addicted to this free, cheap money. And you can see that with the Bank of Canada decision today, where we're the first G7 nation to lower our rates in a time when governments all over the Western world, really all over the world, have been battling this inflation bug. And we hear numbers like inflation is down, and people assume in a lot of cases that means the prices are going to go back to where they were. That just means they're not going up as fast as they were last year. And there's also a lot of questions about how they measure that inflation. And I think most people would agree that we're not in an economy where we're in a reasonable inflation rate at all right now. If you're spending money on the regular basis, you can feel those costs going up and up and up. And this move back towards lower interest rates is just going to make that worse.
Yeah, well, and it gets into a complicated realm. Like they talk about the preferred inflation rate. There's an assumption among economists that our society is supposed to work with a constant inflation rate. It should always, the value of the buying power of the currency should always essentially be going down. And you've just got to hope then that your own income or investments or something is rising by more than they figure 2 to 3% is a good inflation rate. But it means you're always kind of climbing uphill no matter what you do.
Yeah, and I mean, people can argue about whether a 2% inflation rate is good or not. But I think the actual fallacy comes down to this idea that, you can have some ivory tower economists pulling levers and managing the entire economy, right? Like, that's just ridiculous. And I think that's a fallacy that we've seen from our leadership around the world in a lot of areas where they believe that, we can model, we can control, we can understand these extremely complex systems like the climate, an ecosystem, the ocean, the economy. Like, these are systems with way too many inputs for humans to understand, let alone control or affect in a meaningful, deliberate way. And this particular fallacy it goes right back to that same idea, the idea that the government can just control the entire economy by moving interest rates up and down, and somehow that is going to lead to more prosperity for everyone. I think that's a ridiculous idea, and I think that the idea of taking money away from the people who spend the money is really the path out of this for us.
Yeah, so the practicality of Bitcoin, I got to admit, I just took the simple route, though. I got it set up. It just goes in, it goes in. I've never actually drawn from it. I mean, eventually, presumably, I'll want to convert it or use it for something. It is getting more accepted and easier to do, but it's still kind of foreign to a lot of us. There's more businesses accepting that or able to convert that now? Or?
Yeah, and so we've been for the first 15 years of Bitcoin's life, the main use case has been to store value. And that's the core function of money, really, is it needs to be able to take the value you create with your time and store it so that you can use it later somewhere else. And then once your money can do that, you want it to be a medium of exchange, which is what you're talking about now, and being able to spend it at different places. And some companies that I'm involved in, like Bitcoin Well, that's been a sponsor of the Western Standard. One of the main things that we do is we facilitate that transfer. So with Bitcoin Well, for example, you can buy just about any major gift card on the website. You can pay any of your bills that you can pay in your online banking, all with Bitcoin. So we've got a bunch of tools to facilitate that stuff. But there's actually another movement coming sort of in a grassroots way that's going really well here, but is popping up all over the world. And that's sort of this like circular economy spending. And so we're putting on an event, actually a little market that's free to attend. It's kind of like a flea market, farmer's market type thing that we're going to be doing on Canada Day on July 1st, the day before our conference. And, we have a bunch of vendors come out that sell, everything from beef to honey and knickknacks and whatnot, and everybody takes Bitcoin. And part of where this came from was this idea that we've got within the Bitcoin community that, we can see a lot of the like sort of communist dystopian policies that the governments of the world are planning for us, with the central bank digital currencies and the climate lockdowns and all this stuff that, when they tell us what they're going to do, we should believe them. And I think the idea that at some point we won't be allowed to buy more than a certain amount of red meat is not at all far-fetched. And so that was literally like that idea is where the market came from, is we're like, I want to be able to have a place that I can buy my meat with money that the government can't stop. And so, buying beef from an Alberta rancher using Bitcoin, not in the government's currency at all, they're not involved in that transaction whatsoever. And if they try to say you can't have red meat, they're going to have a hard time stopping us.
Yeah, so there's going to be, it's a great way to get off the government's grid, basically. I mean, the old way might have been, I guess, store some gold under your pillow and try and barter with your neighbors, but we've moved beyond that. I guess the international value of this, I mean, this coin doesn't recognize borders, right? You can go country to country and it'll still be a useful currency for you in some ways.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen that in a lot of places that have been troubled around the world. Ukraine, Venezuela was a big one. There was a lot of people escaping from Venezuela because they had Bitcoin. They were able to get out of the country as it descended into the communist hellhole. And, Bitcoin is one of only two currencies that is really accepted everywhere in the world. Every single country in the world, you can spend Bitcoins, you can spend US dollars. You can find someone to change your Bitcoins into the local currency. And that's not true for any other currency, really. And so Bitcoin is a really global currency, but it's also a censorship resistant currency, which is important in cases like what I described before. You can walk across a border with a memorized set of 12 words that's just as good as carrying your wallet. And there's no way for anyone to even know that you have those words in your head, let alone stop you.
Not true enough. I mean, you can't pickpocket somebody's Bitcoin typically unless you're doing something really stupid. So just back to the rodeo before we wrap up. I mean, JP Sears, I'm enough of a political dork. Actually, I recognize that name the second you said it. But for those who aren't familiar with him, I mean, you're not going to go wrong by watching him. He's just hilarious. I love that guy. But I mean, some of the other sessions you got going on, I mean, there's a whole giant list of speakers. Are you going to be covering things like for people who are Bitcoin beginners, or is this kind of advanced, or is there a bit of both? What are people going to get out of this?
Yeah, so we're aiming for it to be mostly targeting to people that are not yet Bitcoiners, that are potential future Bitcoiners. And so we're going to have a lot of topics like one of the ones that I think is going to be really good is why your small business should hold Bitcoin. So we've got a lot of topics that are about how Bitcoin can be useful to normal people in the real world. And then we've got some topics that are also about like how Bitcoin is changing the world and how fiat currency is changing the world. So another one that I'm really excited for is about how the debasement of money around the world is affecting our culture. And I think if you follow the logic on that argument, you can trace it right down to all the ridiculous stuff that you guys were talking about in the lead in there, where how ridiculous does stuff have to get? How much credibility do we have to give these people that are performing all of these ridiculous acts? And this debasement of our culture ultimately comes back to the fact that our money, which is supposed to create a link between a person's actions and the outcome for their lives, is broken. It doesn't do that. The idea of like the American dream, so to speak, where you can work harder, earn more money, and have a better life, doesn't work if a huge percentage of the value of the money that you're earning is being stolen by the federal government and spent on their pet projects. And when people feel that lack of connection between their efforts and their outcome, it leads to kind of this general malaise that you can see all across society. And it actually plays a role in this entire meltdown that we're going through in terms of the crumbling of our cities. This all comes from fiat currency. So we're going to hope to talk a lot more at the conference about what this actually means and how important this is to everyone. And I think people in the sort of freedom community, people who've woken up to the idea that we don't necessarily need to trust the government, that's our ideal audience. And so we've got a promo code Western Standard. Anyone can get tickets on bitcoinrodeo.com, and that's good for $50 off with that promo code.
Oh, right on. So, I didn't know about the promo code. Okay, I'm glad you threw that in while we were here. And I was just going to ask on closing then. So, one more time, the date's going to be in Calgary, and bitcoinrodeo.com is where to sign up.
Yep, July 2nd and 3rd.
July 2nd and 3rd. Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. I hope the conference goes fantastically. I'm sure it will. This isn't your first rodeo. And I appreciate you breaking all that down for us. So, we'll look forward to the conference there and talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Take care.
So that was Dave Bradley, as I said, all things Bitcoin. And yes, the Bitcoin Rodeo is coming. And, there's some good questions I saw in the comment scroll. I don't want to get into a debate about it because there's a lot of debate on the whole things with all that. I wanted to speak mostly on the upcoming Bitcoin Rodeo conference. It's a good spot if you had more questions about it as well. Don asking about, that was a good question about how's El Salvador doing with that national Bitcoin thing, because El Salvador got so messed up. I think they decided to make Bitcoin like their national currency. I'm not sure, actually. I have to look in to see how that all kind of came out. Joseph, so certainly got some strong doubts about it. And but one you mentioned is, what if the internet crashes? How do you access your money? Well, realistically, right now, all of us are so dependent on the internet. I don't carry a heck of a lot of cash in my wallet anymore. If the internet crashes like so badly that it's gone for weeks, well, we're going to be in a catastrophe anyways, because my banks won't be able to give me any cash or money or do any transactions or anything anyways. So we're just as hooped. One thing I'll say, when you talk about government control, and you said any government can control Bitcoin, well, the government really wanted, I'm sure, to get everything they could when they seized people's bank accounts in the past, but they didn't get anybody's Bitcoin. I'm not going to say that Bitcoin's bulletproof. Who knows? But it seems to be safer than keeping your money in the bank in Canada these days. Anyways, I wouldn't advise everybody, of course, put all your money into Bitcoin. That's not my role. I'm not a financial advisor by any means. I found it kind of neat, like I said, that just a little bit of came off my check and went into that Bitcoin account we started a few years ago. And Bitcoin has really gone up like a crazy amount this last few years. So that did quite well. But if you look at the chart over the last few years too, the Bitcoin value still has some, it generally goes up, but it's got some big dips. So if you were using it week by week to buy things, you could kind of hoop yourself, because you buy something with it one day and it turns out that the value of the Bitcoin went up 20% the next day or 10. It's not quite that fast, but shot up. You might not do well with your purchase on it. But it's an interesting development, and anything I think. Personally, I like it as a hedge, for what I've got. I know I've got something that's in a side savings account that is independent from the fiat currency of our current government. Similar, I guess, though. I mean, as Joseph said, metals, they're a good idea. Gold, silver, things like that have something that's outside of the government control. Maybe they'll end up controlling it later. I don't know. Our government's too stupid, I think, to break into Bitcoin. They can't figure that out. I mean, again, look at the Prime Minister. But either way, if you're interested, hit that conference. Don't forget Western Standard. That's the promo code to put into it, and you'll save yourself $50 because there's got to be a couple dozen speakers over those couple days, so they'll answer a whole heck of a lot of questions on it, much better than I would be able to. But speaking of economic retardation and foolishness, let's talk about the NDP. Jagmeet Singh, the champagne socialist who likes to stand up there in his $2,000 tailored suits with his Rolex, next to his sports cars, to tell us all to tighten our belts and live in a nice socialist world. But they've got their big thing. They've made it their hill to die on, the whole grocery pricing thing, the issue. And it's just so friggin' stupid. I'm getting sick to death with people losing it at grocery retailers. I know Galen Weston isn't a nice guy. I know that Loblaw's had a record profit. Who cares? Buy shares in it then, you wimp. God, bitching about somebody making a profit, it's not a bad thing. And guess what? That record profit, yes, it's in the, like at 1 or 2 billion level. But the margin, people, the margin, use your economic common sense. Their margin is under 4%. The reason the profit is in the billions is because they're selling hundreds of billions, because there's hundreds and hundreds of outlets across the country selling groceries to millions of people. They don't have much room to move on the prices. We have a problem with higher prices. We covered a little of that when talking to Dave. It's because our idiot government is printing money and borrowing money so fast that your dollars aren't worth a crap and everything goes up, including your food. The reason people get upset about it when it comes to food is, of course, food's a need. It's not one of those things you can say, well, I'll just stop buying groceries for a couple of months until things stabilize or I get a little more money. No, you have no choice. You've got to keep buying it. And you end up finding yourself buying less or buying stuff of a quality you wouldn't want because you can't afford it. You get concerned. Fair enough, but direct your ire in the proper direction. It's not the retailers, guys. It's not. It's been studied. The Competition Bureau dove into it. Even Prime Minister Ding Dong thought we've got something here for sure. So he directed the Competition Bureau to investigate and dig in. The Competition Bureau came out with a report and they said, yeah, their profits are actually modest. Means they don't have room to cut the prices. But Jagmeet Singh's putting another motion in Parliament today. It'll probably fail. I hope so. Even the Liberals aren't this stupid. But basically saying they want to force grocers to either reduce the prices of their food. Yeah, force them to reduce the prices of their product, or they're going to cap food prices. This is the height of stupidity. This is dumber than anything I even expected out of Jagmeet, and he's pretty friggin' dumb. Anybody who's a socialist can't be that bloody smart, at least not economically. How well did they eat in Russia, guys? The food prices were capped there. Venezuela capped their food prices too, guys. How did that go for them? Oh yeah, in Venezuela, they literally ate their zoo animals. That's how bad it got. You gotta leave the supply chains alone. This government is incompetent. This government is, any government's incompetent. Keep them out of your food supply chains. You cap the prices on these things. You take away the profit from the retailers, guess what's gonna happen? They will close their doors. It's as simple as that. They are millionaires or billionaires who own it, but people also forget, who's the majority shareholders? Pension plans. You own those grocers too. The Canadian pension plan owns a whole pile of Loblaw's stock. So if you plan to take CPP, actually a little bit of that profit's actually coming to you. You're a shareholder in them. But if they can't make money, they can't. And when you're running on a lower than 4% profit margin and you've got a foolish government that forces you to lower prices, you close your doors. They're not a charity. So then what happens? Where does our food come from? Whose sources, when you go into a store and find literally thousands of items and brands, who's going to organize that once the big retailers say, we're done, we're out, we're pulling out? You got to remember, the fart catchers of Trudeau who felt he was onto things and smart and, constantly villainizing our grocery chains and such and trying to imply that they're gouging Canadians and screwing them, and that there's huge money being made and huge record profits. And they came out publicly and said, we're going to get some big European grocery chains to come out here to Canada and set up shop and compete with these guys. Guess how many European chains have come out so far? Yeah, goose egg, zero. Not a single one. Who in their right mind would want to relocate to a country with a government that's talking about forcing you to cap your prices at a certain range? With a government that's going to call you virtually a criminal for having a profit margin of under 4%. If you've got a problem with profit margins, fine. Check out the banks. Their profit margins are around 20%. Look at the margin. That's when you know if you're getting screwed as a consumer or not. Not the gross profit number. Look at the margin, because that's where they got room to move on the price, if they're going to have room to move on the price. And I don't want government to intervene on large profit margin area of business either. I'm just saying, if you are ticked off about paying too much for things in the world, look in the right directions. You want to know one of the highest profit margin industries in Canada? Dairy farmers. Yes, they're well over 20% profit margins because they've got that protected supply management system where they literally make it illegal to sell more than a certain quota, and it forces the prices to stay higher and it keeps their margins higher. Is that better? Because that's what happens when government controls the price. Then the best lobbyists get the money, and the consumers, as always, take it up the tailpipe. Because we've got some of the most expensive dairy on the planet in this country. We have huge agricultural country, all these lands, and we pay a fortune for it. That's what happens when government starts getting into the food business just on a micro level. Now think of if these dingbats manage to make Loblaws pull out, or Walmart, and they will do it eventually. We've seen it in the States, you know, with some of these, it wasn't the price controls going on, but it's when you had these idiotic areas like San Francisco and Portland and progressive areas that, again, villainized the large business owners. And they basically said, we're going to let the shoplifting go. We aren't going to intervene. We're going to let the thieves just keep stealing from you. So they closed. They closed. They said, well, that happened in Chicago too. Well, we're out. We're gone. They closed. Then this community doesn't even have a large one. And then you listen to it shows the stupidity of the progressives. It shows the stupidity of the identity politics. Because I remember some of the howlings too. They're saying they're all moving out of the racialized neighborhoods and it's racism is why they closed the doors. No, it's not. It's because they were getting robbed blind. And the government was saying, we're not going to protect you. They were saying, essentially implying that you have a moral right to steal from them. We had a movement in Canada here. I mean, they've been doing that boycott Loblaws crap for a while. It obviously failed. But they've been talking about having this national shoplift from Loblaws Day. They really were. There was people trying to organize that. You have people organizing, trying to get other people to break the law. What the heck is our society doing? What have you gotten to there? And I'm not talking about some obscure law, parking tickets, or something that's questionable. Stealing the property of another. Simple, basic law. It cannot be allowed to happen yet. I didn't see anybody charged for trying to organize that. I mean, wouldn't that be trying to counsel committing a crime? Is it impossible to track down who was trying to organize that? Though I don't think it amounted to anything anyways, because thankfully most people weren't bloody thieves anyways. But just this foolishness. So when Dave was talking about, you know, how stupid government is and, you know, wanting to keep your funds as clear of them as possible. There's one of the examples. Here's another one. This has been a good one too, right? So the CRTC, this is one of the big areas of the Trudeau regime in the last few years too, controlling information, controlling media, controlling the messaging. Of course, any dictator wants to do that. They don't like hearing outside voices. So now the CRTC, emboldened by crap like Bill C-68, C-11, all these other controlling bills, has said they're going to require online services to contribute 5% of the Canadian revenues to support the Canadian broadcast system. In other words, we're going to steal 5%. I'll call it theft. They're going to steal 5% of what they make from Netflix, Disney. See, is that you know, that demonization of other service. Well, Netflix is big and Disney's big. Well, guess what? The little mom and pop streamers don't exist, guys. There's only big ones. And you all whine your heads off when Netflix raises their prices by $1 or $2 a month. Well, why do you think they will? So when the government's going to steal 5% of their revenues, they're going to raise the prices even further. And then, oh yes, they're going to give that to support the Canadian broadcasting system. Oh, good. So that'll go towards more, you know what, CBC style gems of crap that nobody wants to watch. That's the only way those things get produced. They don't get produced based on people actually wanting to consume the content. They just get produced because they get a grant from somebody in the government. And they've stolen that money from the streaming services. So nobody cares. They'll make a stupid documentary or a bad comedy or whatever that nobody's going to view. But as long as they got the paycheck from stealing 5% from the streamers who actually provide citizens with what they want to watch, the grifters will come out and they'll make those things. As Ian Leslie said, somebody's got to pay for the CBC. Yeah, and this is above and beyond though, right? The CBC is already taking what, $1.4 billion a year in tax dollars, $1.4 billion. And then they steal, and I'll call it stealing again, because if you get that much in tax dollars just to pay for your operations, they sell advertising for hundreds of millions a year too. But that's stealing it from the private market because the private broadcasters can't compete with them on advertising dollars. I mean, when you get $1 billion in the bank, you can really undercut the advertising rates. And this disrupts the market. This makes for worse content. This is the cycle. This is what it leads to. The incentive, again, isn't to make a better production that people want to pay for or that streaming services want to carry. Now the incentive is, what's the best application I can put forward to the heritage department to get my grant to make my production? They don't worry about whether people want to watch it. They just want to make sure all the DEI checkboxes are hit. And then they'll get their check and they will make some piece of garbage that nobody will watch. But you will get to pay for it, guys. You. Because, again, Netflix, Disney, Prime, they're charities. So when the government starts stealing more of their earnings, revenue, and profit, They're just going to pass it down to you. And here's another one, a liberal NDP bill. Getting back to that speech, getting back to control. They want to ban pro-oil speech. They really do. This was stuff that Charlie Angus, one of the nuttier NDP MPs, came out with a while back. Said he wanted to make it illegal for oil companies to say nice things about what they do. Well, this liberal NDP bill now, Angus was shut down because, oh my God, that's too insane. That's over the top. It's over the edge. Well, now that Singh and Trudeau were cuddling in bed together and thinking about it, maybe we could control those oil companies. So yeah, they want to basically fine oil companies for daring to point out on how they've been reducing emissions or how they've been doing anything good. They want to gag them. They want them to look at their shoes and apologize for giving you a service that keeps you from freezing to death in the winter. It keeps your lights on and keeps your vehicle running. And of course, employs hundreds of thousands of Canadians, brings billions and billions into the economy, funds all your bloody social welfare programs. But we've got to call them jerks for having dared done so. And they are not allowed to defend themselves. That's scary. The government's banning self-defense verbally for these companies. This is insane. But again, insane, right? The other thing, one thing I'll leave off on another note, every party dead silent on foreign interference. It sounds like every party might have an MP or two who's been compromised by foreign interests. I don't care which party it is. Name the bloody names. This is insane. The stuff we got going on in this country. All right, well, I'm all out of ranting time. I have one comment from one of our commenters I'll read one more time. Are they going to ban the Edmonton Oilers because it promotes oil? We'll see. I wouldn't put it beyond them anymore. So either way, guys, again, make sure to take out a subscription, westernstandard.news/subscription. This is how we keep rolling. Watch the pipeline. The three of us will be on breaking down some more issues later tonight. And of course, it'll be on all our channels. Share these channels. Get more people out there. This is how we can beat the old legacy media and the government, staying independent. So thank you all for tuning in today, guys, and I will see you all again at this time next week.